Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we are setting off into a story that isn't about some glamorous battlefield, nor about a toga-wrapped philosopher pacing back and forth with endless theories. Instead, you are climbing a rocky Cretan mountainside in the moonlight to meet a goat. Yes, a goat, but not just any goat. This one happens to be raising the future king of the gods. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Try hiking in sandals on sharp limestone while balancing a basket of figs. Not fun. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you dropped your location and local time in the comments so we can see this little bedtime community stretching across the map like constellations. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You make your way up through twisted olive trees and whispering pines. The mountain path crunches underfoot, scattered with goat droppings that glimmer faintly in the silver wash of moonlight. Somewhere up there, hidden among caves and crags, a baby is crying, a baby who just happens to be Zeus. And the one answering those cries with a nudge and warm milk is Amalthea, the goat who doesn't know she's part of cosmic destiny. The air smells sharp, a mix of herbs and wild thyme. You reach a cave mouth, the kind that looks like it could swallow a traveler whole, but inside it feels oddly homely. Picture a flickering oil lamp set by nymph hands, reed mats, and the faint sound of a goat shifting her hooves. Amalthea lowers her shaggy head, her horns curving in elegant arcs, and the baby god tugs at her side like any mortal child. Historians still argue whether Amalthea was truly a goat, or perhaps a goat-shaped nymph, or even just a poetic metaphor for divine nourishment. But tonight you're seeing her simply as she is, a living creature chewing cud with an unhurried calm that almost makes you forget the paranoid titan Cronus is out there searching for his son. You settle against the cool rock wall, watching the soft rhythm of Zeus's breathing as he drifts to sleep after feeding. Amalthea's hide is coarse but warm, her breath a mix of hay and honeycomb. Occasionally she gives a stubborn little snort, as if daring any titan to come and try to harm her charge. You can almost laugh at the absurdity, cosmic power resting in the arms of a goat. But then goats have always been underestimated, haven't they? A mainstream fact to anchor you: goats were among the first domesticated animals, dating back at least 10,000 years, supplying humans with milk, meat, and companionship. The ancient Greeks would have known goats as stubborn, hardy survivors, perfect guardians for a god in hiding. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Roman poets sometimes joked that goats had a talent for predicting earthquakes because they'd fidget and stamp nervously before the ground shook. Imagine Amalthea twitching her ears not just at Zeus's cries, but at the subtle tremors of fate itself. Zeus stirs his tiny fist, clenching, and Amalthea licks his brow with an oddly maternal patience. You smile at the thought one day he'll throw thunderbolts, but for now he's mostly throwing spit bubbles. You realize the scene feels strangely domestic, almost like stepping into a shepherd's hut after a long day. The myth could almost pass as a bedtime vignette told by a grandmother. There once was a goat who raised a boy who would rule the skies. Still, questions tug at the edge of the firelight. Was Amalthea ever honored by her own kind beyond her role in Zeus's infancy? Scholars still argue whether she was given cult shrines or whether she simply faded into the background of bigger myths. But in this cave, under the rasp of crickets and the sigh of mountain wind, she is very much alive, and her importance cannot be mistaken. The baby shifts again, giggling now, tugging on one of Amalthea's ears. The goat doesn't mind. She chews her cud, blinking slowly, as though she knows gods and children alike need patience. You picture her like a bedtime guardian, holding back the dark, keeping the world at bay with little more than warm milk and quiet strength. Outside, the stars glitter. If you tilt your head, you almost see shapes already taking form, the constellations that one day will immortalize this humble goat. But not yet. For now, you close your eyes, listening to her steady breathing, and let the mountain night cradle you along with Zeus himself. You wake to the faint sound of drumming, not a proper band, not anything rehearsed, just an irregular thumping that echoes off the mountain slopes. At first, you think it might be a shepherd tapping a stick on rocks, but as you listen closer, you realize it's more deliberate. This is the daily soundtrack of Zeus's life, in hiding noisy nymphs and guardians, doing everything they can to drown out the cries of a very important infant. Amalthea is already up hooves, shifting across the cave floor as she noses through a pile of herbs left by the nymph Adrastea. They've made a little home here. You can smell fresh honey, see strips of bark fashioned into crude containers, and even catch the shimmer of river stones placed around the baby's cradle for good luck. It's a strange nursery, half rustic, half divine. Zeus himself is wriggling cheeks flushed, his tiny fists batting at the air like he's already practicing for thunderbolts. The nymphs coo over him, but every time his wail pierces the cave, the Curetes outside pick up their shields and bang them in rhythm. You picture a group of armored babysitters dancing in circles, clashing bronze and stamping feet, not out of celebration but sheer practicality. If Cronus is listening, he's going to hear nothing but a rowdy Cretan dance party. The detail sounds silly, but it's historically grounded. Ancient Greeks loved noisy rituals. Music, drums, cymbals, all were used in cult practices to ward off evil or summon divine favor. Historians still argue whether the Curetes were originally mythic guardians, priests, in goatskin armor, or simply a local war band mythologized over time. Whatever the case, their clamor is Zeus's lullaby. You shuffle closer to the scene. The cave is alive with contradictions, soft moss forbidding jagged stalactites looming overhead, the sweetness of goat's milk cut with the acrid smell of torch smoke. Amalthea flicks her tail, unimpressed by the racket outside, and lowers herself so Zeus can nurse again. His cries fade into gurgles, then into hiccups, as if he's already learning to time his needs with the noisy routine. A quirky tidbit floats into your drowsy mind. Goats don't have upper front teeth. Instead, they use a tough dental pad and their lower teeth to tear plants. So every time Amalthea chews, it's with this endearing side-to-side jaw wiggle, which somehow makes her seem even gentler, even more patient with her divine fosterling. The days blur together in this rhythm. You rise with the sun painting gold across Mount Ida, watch Amalthea guide Zeus through his morning fussing, then listen to the clatter of bronze that hides it all from Cronus's ears. Sometimes shepherds pass below, and they shake their heads at the racket echoing from above. Rumors already spread in the valleys, strange gods or drunken dancers, or maybe just wild goats practicing percussion. You smile at how mortals always invent stories to explain the unexplainable. Zeus, meanwhile, grows by inches and confidence. He splashes in basins of spring water the nymphs bring in his laughter, startling doves out of the cave mouth. You can see it now, how a child born in secret, surrounded by myth and noise and goat's milk, will one day feel right at home commanding storms. But for now, the cave is simply a home. You breathe in the earthy comfort, hear the steady chewing of Amalthea, and feel the mountain cradle you all. Outside, the Curetes clash and dance again, a raucous, almost comedic soundscape that, strangely enough, is what safety looks like in this myth. You let your eyelids droop, the echoes fading into something like a heartbeat, steady and protective. A noisy lullaby, yes, but one that has kept the greatest secret in the Greek world safe for another day. Morning mist drifts across the mountainside, curling into the cave like cautious fingers. You stretch your legs, hear the creak of rock settling, and then clang. The sound jolts you not from danger, but from sheer volume. The Curetes are at it again. Outside the cave, they stamp in formation shields, raised bronze edges glinting in the dawn light. Their spears strike rhythmically, clashing with the ringing that has become part of Zeus's infancy. It is not war, but noise. A deliberate racket to confuse the sky, to send Cronus listening in vain for the sound of his hidden son's cries. You edge closer to the cave mouth, peering out. The Curetes look like warriors rehearsing for a festival, helmets bobbing, tunics swishing, shields colliding in a metallic chorus. Their movements are oddly graceful, almost choreographed like a war dance slowed down. Some say this was the origin of the Pyrrhic dance, a martial display the Greeks later performed at festivals. Historians still argue whether that connection is true, but the image fits: men clashing weapons not to kill, but to shield life with noise. Behind you, Amalthea flicks her ears irritably. Goats don't much care for percussion sections, especially at sunrise. She stamps one hoof and her bell jingles in accidental counterpoint to the clamor outside. Zeus, however, giggles. He seems to like the racket, as if the chaos already speaks to him. You imagine him years later rattling thunder across Olympus with the same joy he shows now hearing his babysitter's shield chorus. The nymphs, too, keep busy. One braids herbs into garlands, another stirs honey into warm goat's milk, and a third hums softly, weaving a melody beneath the crash of metal. The whole cave feels like a strange orchestra. The Curetes thunder, the goats chewing the baby's laughter, and the nymph's lilting song. A quirky tidbit nudges into your thoughts. Ancient Greek goats sometimes wore tiny bells so shepherds could track them over rough terrain. Those bells, faint and melodic, would carry for miles. Imagine Cronus prowling the valleys below, confused by overlapping noises, bells, drums, shields, all conspiring to mask one infant cry. Your eyes wander to the cave walls. Flickering torchlight catches painted symbols, spiral stars, and crude depictions of goats. Were these made by shepherds or by early worshippers, marking this as a sacred place? Historians still argue whether caves like this were used as cult sanctuaries before myth gave them divine tenets. Either way, the images shimmer like half-remembered dreams, reinforcing the sense that this goat and this child are part of something larger than themselves. Zeus squirms, wriggling free of his blanket, and Amalthea nudges him gently back. He squeals, not in distress but in delight, answering shield clash with baby laughter. You can't help but grin at the scene. Here is destiny, diapered and drooling, guarded not by silence but by relentless noise. The clamor outside builds to a crescendo, shields hammering like drums, voices chanting in guttural unison. Then suddenly stillness. A bird caws overhead. The mountain exhales, and the Curetes stand in silence listening. Cronus has not come. The baby god is safe another day. Inside, Amalthea sighs, settling back on her haunches. Zeus curls against her flank, soothed by the goat's steady heartbeat. You lie back too, lulled, not by quiet, but by the echo of chaos now fading into the mountain air. Somehow this is what safety feels like, a wall of sound, a goat's warm breath, and a baby dreaming in secret. The morning hush settles in again, though hush is relative when you share a cave with a goat, a baby, and half a troop of mythic percussionists outside. Amalthea shifts her weight, folding her legs beneath her body with the grace of an animal that has always known how to rest on stone. Zeus, meanwhile, starts fussing in the way only a baby can, red face, clenched fists, noises far louder than something so small should be capable of producing. And here comes breakfast. Amalthea leans over, patient as always, offering him a meal of warm goat's milk. It's an oddly domestic picture, and you can almost forget that this milk is keeping the ruler of Olympus alive. The nymphs, ever attentive, add their own touches, honey gathered from wild hives in the mountain clefts, figs mashed into a sweet paste, and sometimes a sprinkling of barley if the baby seems particularly restless. Ancient diets were simple but nourishing. Honey was one of the few natural sweeteners available, used everywhere from offerings to energy boosts. Historians still argue whether Cretans at the time had perfected cheesemaking already, but it's easy to imagine Amalthea's milk transformed into curds by the nymphs stored in little clay pots. They'd need every trick possible to keep their young charge thriving in this hidden life. You kneel closer, inhaling the rustic scent. It's a mixture of sweetness, sharp milk, and smoke from a torch smoldering near the cave wall. The texture of the honey clings to your fingers, sticky even as you lick them clean, and in this sensory blur the baby god is nourished, his cries fading into hiccups, then into a drowsy gurgle as he drinks. There's a quirky tidbit here too. Goat's milk has a slightly different fat composition than cow's milk. It's easier to digest, sometimes even recommended today for sensitive stomachs. You chuckle quietly at the thought. Zeus, king of the gods, raised on what modern parents would call the gentle option. Amalthea chews steadily while Zeus feeds her jaw, moving in that side-to-side rhythm again. She seems almost unconcerned by the weight of the universe resting against her flank. Outside, the Curetes thump their shields less frantically, now their sounds drifting into something like background music for the meal. You imagine them arguing later about who gets the bigger serving of goat cheese as payment. The baby shifts, milk-drunk and sleepy-eyed, and you can see how the routine has settled into everyone. Amalthea offers food, the nymphs sweeten it, the guardians mask the noise, and somehow life continues. This is how worlds are saved, sometimes not with lightning or battles, but with steady rhythms of feeding, burping, and rocking a god to sleep. As Zeus drifts off again, you lean back, your own stomach grumbling at the smell of figs and honey. The nymphs laugh softly, offering you a bite, and you accept, savoring the sticky sweetness. The taste is grounding, pulling you into this quiet moment where myth feels less like grandeur and more like survival. Amalthea snorts, shifting again, and for a second her horn knocks against the stone wall with a hollow ring. You don't know it yet, but that same horn will one day become a symbol of abundance, the cornucopia. For now, it's just another reminder of her solid presence, the goat who fed a god. The cave dims, torches flicker, and the baby god sighs in sleep. You find yourself sighing too, the mix of honey and smoke pulling you toward rest. The Curetes outside resume their steady thump like a heartbeat echoed through bronze. Safety as noisy food is simple, and the fate of Olympus rests tonight on goat's milk and honey. The cave is quiet again, except for the crunch of Amalthea's teeth working at a branch she has dragged inside. You blink surprised at her strength. This isn't some dainty little goat nibbling at clover. Amalthea prefers entire branches stripped with gusto, her horns knocking against the stone ceiling as she maneuvers them into position. She has quirks, this goat. You've noticed them by now, the way she always headbutts the same stalagmite before lying down as if she's checking that it's still solid. The way she snorts dramatically if one of the nymphs fusses too much over Zeus, as though she is saying, "Excuse me, I was here first." And the oddest thing, you've seen her stand perfectly still for long minutes, staring at the cave mouth, ears twitching, as if she's listening to something no one else can hear. Goats have always carried a certain symbolism in Greek culture. They were linked with wild energy, fertility, and sometimes chaos. Dionysus himself was said to have been raised in part among goats and satyrs. Those half-goat revelers embody mischief and appetite. Historians still argue whether Amalthea was written as a literal goat or a goat-shaped goddess to make the story more palatable. Either way, the Greeks clearly saw her as something more than ordinary livestock. Zeus, still half asleep, tugs at her ear with tiny fingers. Amalthea tolerates it, flicking her tail lazily as though this is just another quirk of her unusual foster child. You get the impression she'd put up with nearly anything from him. After all, what's a little ear-tugging compared to hiding from Cronus's cosmic appetite? A quirky tidbit springs to mind. Goats have excellent peripheral vision. Their rectangular pupils give them almost a panoramic view, perfect for spotting predators on mountain slopes. You wonder if Amalthea's constant watchfulness, those long minutes of staring, isn't just superstition, but genuine vigilance. Perhaps she alone could spot Cronus's shadow long before the nymphs or Curetes had any idea. And then there's her bell. You notice it again when she shakes her head, a soft jingling echoing through the cave. Shepherds in Crete still use goat bells to track their animals today, and it's not hard to imagine villagers long ago hearing such sounds at night and spinning tales of divine guardianship. If you were half asleep in a mountain hut and heard that faint metallic chime in the distance, wouldn't you imagine it was a god's pet on patrol? Zeus, milk-drunk and smiling, rolls onto his back, kicking chubby legs in the air. Amalthea lowers her muzzle and nudges him upright again with practiced ease. This is their dance, the baby learning to move, the goat correcting him with gentle prods, the nymphs laughing at the sight. You realize that myth often skips these little moments, the quirks that make a relationship feel real. But here in this cave, it's the quirks that matter most. You watch Amalthea finally settle, curling her legs beneath her like a fortress of fur. Zeus nestles against her side, already drifting again. The cave hums with her steady chewing, the faint rattle of her bell, and the quiet chatter of nymphs weaving herbs into garlands. It's not the kind of grandeur you expect from mythology. It's homely, odd, and somehow even more magical because of it. The cave feels larger when you take the time to wander. You rise from your spot near Amalthea and Zeus, stretching your legs and let your hand brush against the cool, damp wall. The rock sweats with condensation, tiny rivulets catching in carved grooves where countless hands, mortal and divine, have traced before you. You step deeper, guided by a faint glow where the nymphs have left oil lamps burning. The flames sputter, casting long shadows that leap across stalactites hanging like teeth from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, water drips steadily, echoing into the dark chambers below. The whole place breathes with you. Inhale, exhale, drip, drip, until you forget where your own rhythm ends and the cave's begins. The Idaean cave, they call it. Later generations would speak of it with reverence, imagining it as both cradle and temple. Historians still argue whether this cave was a genuine place of cult worship before it was folded into Zeus's mythology. Archaeologists have uncovered offerings, bronze shields, clay figurines, even little double-headed axes that suggest people once trekked here to honor something or someone. Standing here now, you understand why. The cave feels less like shelter and more like a heart beating quietly under the mountain. Amalthea's hoofbeats echo as she follows you a short way, keeping an eye on both Zeus and the curious visitor you've become. The sound is surprisingly loud, bouncing from wall to wall until it multiplies like a whole herd keeping pace. You almost laugh. It's like having a goat chorus trailing behind you, bleeding in surround sound. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Caves in Crete often doubled as storage places for cheese and wine thanks to their cool, steady temperatures. You imagine the nymphs stashing little clay pots of Amalthea's milk curd in side chambers, inventing the world's first godly pantry. It's not quite the banquet halls of Olympus, but everyone starts somewhere. You run your hand across a carved spiral, its grooves filled with soot from centuries of torches. Spirals were sacred to the Minoans, symbolizing cycles of life and eternity. Perhaps some shepherd carved it, or perhaps it was the nymphs themselves marking Zeus's safe haven. The pattern glimmers faintly in the torchlight, reminding you that myths often live in stone before they live in song. Zeus's laughter rings out behind you, echoing strangely down the passage. The sound multiplies just like Amalthea's hooves, turning a single giggle into a choir of baby gods. You grin, knowing that even his laughter has the power to fill a cavern like thunder. Someday it will be storms. For now it's just joy bouncing off stone. You pause, breathing in the air, damp mineral heavy, tinged with the faint smoke of oil lamps. It feels timeless. People have sheltered in caves for millennia, drawn by their stability, their protection. And yet you can't shake the sense that this one holds something more. Historians still argue whether this was ever meant as a literal home, or if the cave itself was always symbolic, representing the hidden womb of the earth nurturing a god. You turn back, letting the shadows guide you to the main chamber again. There Amalthea has reclaimed her place, Zeus tucked against her side, the nymphs weaving yet more garlands to drape across the walls. You settle near them, warmed by the firelight, the cave's echoes still humming in your ears. The Idaean cave isn't just a backdrop. It's part of the story, a cradle made of stone teaching you that sometimes the most ordinary-seeming places carry the weight of entire worlds. You linger near the cave's entrance, peering out at the world beyond. Morning mist still clings to the slopes, blurring the outlines of pine and olive trees. Farther down the mountain, faint figures move along a path, shepherds guiding flocks, their staffs tapping against stone, their voices carrying low in the still air. To them, this is just another day of grazing and wool gathering, unaware that a god is growing up above their heads. One shepherd pauses, listening. The echo of the Curetes' shield clashing drifts faintly down, mingled with the occasional bleat from Amalthea. He shakes his head and mutters something to his companion. You imagine the rumor taking root, strange noises from the mountain, half dance, half thunder. Mortals always invent stories for what they don't understand. Historians still argue whether the shepherds of Crete really believed Mount Ida was home to gods, or whether later poets simply added rustic details for color. But it's easy to see how such tales would spread. You picture them returning to their village at dusk, telling children that the mountain sings when it wants to, or warning neighbors to avoid certain paths after dark. Before long, whispers become myth, and myth becomes accepted truth. Behind you, Amalthea lets out a deep, satisfied grunt. She's found a patch of wild herbs near the cave mouth, chewing steadily, her rectangular pupils reflecting the morning light. Zeus is awake again, propped on a bed of moss, giggling as he stuffs his fists into his mouth. The nymphs are close by, braiding little crowns of flowers that they sometimes place on his head, though he inevitably yanks them off to chew instead. A quirky tidbit to tuck into this moment: in some rural Greek villages, shepherds believed goats could sense spirits or divine presence. If a goat refused to enter a place, it was considered unlucky. Imagine then the irony of Amalthea choosing to live in a cave. Mortals might have avoided her instincts, not just correct, but essential to raising the hidden king of the gods. You hear the faint bleating of other goats on the slope, the shepherds calling, the tinkling of bells. Amalthea pricks her ears, listening with something like recognition. Does she miss the herd, or does she consider herself separate now, elevated by her strange duty? It's hard to tell. She returns to chewing calmly, as though the outside world doesn't matter anymore. Zeus kicks his legs, squealing with delight at the morning bustle. His laughter is echoed faintly by the Curetes outside, who ever dramatic respond with a quick clash of shields, as if to say, "We heard you, little god, and we're still here." It's almost comedic, like a conversation in two very different languages. Baby giggles and bronze thunder. The shepherds below keep moving, their figures shrinking as they disappear into the valley haze. Life continues as it always has, goats grazing, wool being gathered, rumors whispered. Yet, in this cave, something extraordinary grows in secret. You settle back against the rock, hearing both worlds at once, the ordinary and the divine, and realize how thin the line between them really is. It happens on a day like any other: Amalthea chewing on a stubborn branch, Zeus babbling nonsense syllables, the Curetes outside, clattering their shields with their usual flair. But then you hear it, a sharp crack, not from bronze or stone, but from horn against rock. Amalthea jerks her head back, and suddenly one of her curved horns lies on the cave floor. The nymphs rush forward, gasping, their garlands forgotten. Zeus himself giggles, utterly delighted by the accident, as if it were all part of a game. You pick up the broken piece, heavier than you expected, its surface ridged like the rings of a tree, each layer a quiet testament to years of growth. What to do with a broken horn? In the hands of the nymphs, it becomes more than just discarded bone. They fill it with fruit figs and honey, transforming it into a makeshift vessel. Soon it seems to overflow, never running out, as if Amalthea's sacrifice has granted it a power of its own. The horn of plenty. The cornucopia is born right there on the stone floor of the cave. Historians still argue whether the cornucopia was originally linked to Amalthea or borrowed later from harvest symbolism. Either way, the story has stuck: abundant springs from the goat who fed a god. Imagine telling that to a hungry villager: food forever flowing from a broken horn. No wonder the image became so enduring. Zeus crawls toward it, reaching stubby hands to grab a fig that wasn't there a moment ago. He munches happily, sticky juice running down his chin, while Amalthea watches calmly, unbothered by her missing horn. Her patience borders on saintly. You almost expect her to roll her eyes at all the fuss. A quirky tidbit fits perfectly here. In Roman times, the cornucopia became a common symbol on coins and statues, often paired with goddesses of fortune. People would literally carry the goat's gift in their pockets, an emblem of eternal abundance, jingling beside their daily currency. You set the horn back down now, glowing faintly in the lamplight, brimming with fruit that no one remembers placing there. The nymphs whisper prayers of gratitude. Amalthea flicks her tail and resumes chewing, and Zeus kicks his legs in sticky triumph. Something ordinary has cracked open into myth, and you were there to watch it happen. The Curetes outside crash their shields again, louder this time, perhaps sensing something momentous within. Their noise mingles with Zeus's laughter, the drip of cave water, and Amalthea's steady chewing. And just like that, the cave has one more relic to its name, a symbol that will ripple across centuries of art and ritual. You lean back, letting the scene etch itself into memory: a goat, a godling, and a horn that will never be empty again. Days pass, and you notice subtle changes in the child curled against Amalthea's side. Zeus is no longer just a bundle of cries and gurgles. His eyes follow the shadows on the cave walls, and when the Curetes clash their shields outside, he kicks his legs as though he wants to join in. You watch him crawl farther each day, his fingers finding the edges of rocks, tugging at vines, and sometimes even pulling Amalthea's tail just to see what will happen. The goat, endlessly patient, tolerates his antics. She huffs, shifts her weight, and occasionally nudges him back with her muzzle, but there's no malice in it. If anything, she seems amused. And yet you can feel something stirring, a kind of restless energy in Zeus, like the mountain air itself is too small for him. Historians still argue whether these myths were meant to humanize Zeus with childish behaviors, or to show his early signs of power. Either way, the stories always highlight this stage: the god who cannot stay still, already testing the boundaries of his secret nursery. One morning you see it clearly. Zeus toddles toward the cornucopia, still brimming endlessly with figs, nuts, and honey. Instead of eating, he tips it over with a laugh, scattering fruit across the stone floor. Amalthea snorts in disapproval, but the boy claps his hands, delighted with the chaos he has made. The nymphs, of course, scramble to gather everything up, muttering about his mischievous streak. You can't help but grin. Gods, like toddlers, enjoy testing limits. A quirky tidbit fits here. Goats themselves are notorious explorers, climbing trees, balancing on rooftops, and poking their noses into anything left unattended. Perhaps Zeus learned his restlessness not from destiny, but from the goat who raised him. Imagine thunderbolts as nothing more than an upgraded version of knocking things off shelves. The Curetes seem to sense his growing boldness too. Their shield rhythms shift from protective clatter to something more like a celebratory dance, as if they already recognize the boy's spark of authority. Zeus squeals in delight, raising his tiny fists as though he's conducting their noise. You get a glimpse of the future, the god who will command storms now, rehearsing with giggles and shield clashes. Still there is tenderness here. When the noise grows too much, Amalthea lowers her head and lets him curl into her neck. The restless spark dims into soft breathing, the godling surrendering to a nap against the warmth of fur. He is both child and destiny, both mischief and miracle contained for now within this cave. You watch the scene with quiet awe. The air smells of honey and moss. The torchlight flickers against the broken horn of plenty, and Amalthea's breathing steadies into a lullaby. Zeus will not stay small forever, that much is clear, but for now his restless play is only practice. And you are there listening to the mountain hold its breath as the boy god begins to grow into his power. The mountain air sharpens one evening, colder than usual, and with it comes whispers. You don't hear them from Amalthea or the nymphs, they are too occupied with feeding Zeus sticky figs and mopping up his mischief, but from the shepherds on distant slopes, from wandering travelers who pause near the cave mouth, from the wind that carries gossip downhill. The whispers always circle back to the same name, Cronus. You've likely heard the story in fragments, though it's stranger up close. Cronus, father of Zeus, king of the Titans, had a peculiar habit of swallowing his children whole, not as punishment for leaving their sandals on the stairs, but out of raw paranoia. He feared prophecy, feared being overthrown, feared the fate that had already unseated his own father. So down the gullet they went, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, each child tucked away inside his belly like pearls in a grotesque oyster. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects real anxieties about inheritance and succession in ancient societies, or if it's simply the Greeks' dramatic flair for explaining why Zeus's siblings were so unusually patient with him later. Either way, it gives a shiver to think about the cave's secret. This little goat-fed toddler is the one Cronus missed. The Curetes know it. Their noisy shield clashing takes on new urgency, a metallic wall meant not just to mask cries, but to shout defiance at the heavens. You cannot have this one. The nymphs know it too. They glance nervously at the horizon whenever thunder rolls. Even Amalthea seems more watchful now, ears swiveling at each sound beyond the cave mouth, as though expecting an enormous titan-shaped shadow. Zeus himself, utterly unbothered. He tries to wrestle Amalthea's beard, laughs at the bouncing fruit in the cornucopia, and kicks his legs when the Curetes provide their daily racket. You can almost imagine him saying dad who never heard of him. A quirky tidbit here, some later retellings suggest Cronus didn't so much swallow the children as hide them inside his stomach magically, which is only marginally less strange. You picture him pacing around with a full belly of squabbling immortal toddlers, and it's hard not to smirk. The Greeks rarely did subtle. Still, the threat lingers like smoke. You catch yourself glancing toward the cave entrance, more often half expecting a giant hand to peel back the rock. Yet the mountain remains steady. The cave holds its silence, and Amalthea flicks her tail as if to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." For now you take comfort in the ordinary. The drip of cave water, the smell of crushed herbs on the floor, the warm exhale of a goat who guards a secret greater than empires. Cronus may still lurk in stories and fears, but here in the shadows of Ida, Zeus grows louder, sturdier, and harder to hide. And you are there to feel the tension stretch like a bowstring not yet released. Time has a funny way of smoothing edges. The urgency of Cronus's looming shadow fades a little as days blur into seasons on the mountainside. Zeus keeps growing sturdy legs, carrying him farther into the cave's nooks, and Amalthea continues her quiet, patient guardianship. Yet even before the boy becomes the thunder-wielding king, Amalthea's name begins to ripple outward, gathering a legacy of her own. You hear it first in the hushed voices of shepherds. They whisper that the strange goat of Mount Ida is no ordinary beast, that she has been chosen by fate. A shrine appears crude at first, just stacked stones with sprigs of laurel left on top. Later, more elaborate offerings follow carved wooden bowls, tiny clay figures of goats, even milk poured out onto the earth in her honor. It seems odd, doesn't it, to imagine an entire people revering a goat? But then again, this goat fed the god who would feed them justice or thunder, depending on his mood. Historians still argue whether Amalthea was originally worshipped as a goat at all, or if she began as a nurturing nymph later transformed into caprine form by the storytellers. Both strands linger in the myths, leaving us to wonder, was she ever flesh and fur, or always spirit and symbol? You may never know, but standing here in the cave, you smell the goat hair, hear the hooves on stone, and choose to believe. A quirky tidbit: in some local traditions, children were once told not to tug too hard at a goat's ears, lest they anger Amalthea herself. You picture a child sulking as their grandmother warns that goat could be the mother of gods, while the goat in question simply eyes the nearest patch of thistles. Her legacy stretches skyward, too. One evening, as the cave glows with fading torchlight, you hear the nymphs speaking of stars. They point up at night, connecting dots in the heavens, and trace a goat-shaped figure among the constellations. Later Greeks would call it Capricorn, but in these whispers you hear the first hint of Amalthea lifted to the heavens, eternal guardian shimmering above the mountain. Even Zeus seems to notice. When he toddles outside, he points upward with sticky fingers, laughing as though the stars are clashing their shields back at him. Amalthea, ever steady, lowers her head beside him, the two of them framed by constellations that will one day carry both their names. You lean against the cave wall, lulled by the goat's rhythmic chewing, the nymph's soft chants, and the metallic dance of the Curetes outside. Amalthea is no longer just caretaker, she is shrine symbol star. Her presence radiates outward, leaving offerings in villages and patterns in the sky, all while she remains here in the cave, content to chew branches and nudge Zeus back from the cliff's edge. Her story is not finished, not yet, but you can feel the ground shifting beneath it, myth layering itself over the mountain, with each whispered prayer, each constellation drawn in the dark. And you are here among it all, watching a goat become more than goat, watching Amalthea become a legacy. You begin to notice something curious: Amalthea's story does not sit alone on the mountaintop. Across the world, other animals seem to echo her role, each culture weaving its own guardian beast into the fabric of childhood and survival. The parallels are almost uncanny, like threads stitched between distant looms. In Egypt, you might recall the goddess Hathor was often shown as a cow, her horns cradling the sun disk. She nourished gods and mortals alike with her milk, a divine mother figure whose soft gaze felt not unlike Amalthea's. In India, stories tell of Kamadhenu, the wish-granting cow whose abundance feels strikingly similar to Amalthea's horn of plenty. And in Norse mythology, there is Audhumla, the primeval cow licking salty ice blocks until the first giant emerged. Imagine that creation itself sparked by a cow's tongue. Historians still argue whether these animal caregivers point to shared archetypes in human storytelling, or if they sprouted independently like wildflowers across cultures. Did a Greek herdsman hear a sailor's tale from far-off lands, or are humans simply wired to revere the creatures that fed them? The answer slips through your fingers as elusive as starlight. A quirky tidbit here: in some old Slavic folk tales, goats were believed to predict storms, their stamping hooves and restless bleating serving as a kind of rustic weather forecast. You can almost imagine Amalthea doing the same, warning the Curetes that Zeus's future thunderbolts were already brewing in his tiny fists. You wander deeper into the comparison, tracing invisible lines. Amalthea's goat milk feels no less sacred than Hathor's cow milk or Kamadhinu's abundance. Her broken horn overflows just like the offerings poured to fertility goddesses across Mesopotamia. Even her constellation echoes others in China. Goat and sheep stars were linked to seasonal cycles of rain and harvest, quiet guardians of survival from above. Meanwhile, in the cave, life carries on. Zeus babbles nonsense words that almost sound like commands, the Curetes keep up their din, and Amalthea still chews steadily on scrubby branches, wholly unbothered by her accidental fame. She does not know she is being compared across continents, that one day scholars will argue whether she was goat nymph or metaphor. She only knows the boy leaning into her flank, sticky with figs, safe in her shadow. The mountain holds it all: whispers of Egypt, echoes of India, rumors from northern sagas. Yet the cave remains quiet except for chewing laughter and shield clashes. You close your eyes, and for a moment, Amalthea is all of them at once, cow-goat cosmic mother feeding not just one god, but the whole lineage of stories humans tell when they're trying to explain why they're still here. And you are here too, resting against the cool stone, watching parallels braid themselves into myth, lulled by the sound of a goat's jaw working endlessly patiently as the stars outside turn in their endless dance. The cave grows familiar now, the routine's predictable Zeus tugging Amalthea's beard, the Curetes clanging their shields in percussive dedication, the nymphs whispering lullabies that never quite rhyme. Yet you also hear a different rhythm begin to creep in the rhythm of debate. Not the loud kind with shouting and overturned amphorae, but the gentle, endless murmurs of scholars who can't seem to agree on what Amalthea really was. Some say she was purely a goat flesh, and for her milk literal nourishment for the infant god. Others argue she was a nymph, her name meaning tender goddess, who raised Zeus with motherly care, but was later recast in goat form by storytellers trying to make sense of the past. And still others propose a third path, that she was both a divine being able to shift between woman and goat, depending on who was telling the tale after a long day of wine. Historians still argue whether the goat version reflects older pastoral traditions celebrating the animal that sustained early Greek herders, or whether the nymph version was more respectable for later city dwellers who preferred their divine caretakers without hooves. The tension hums like an unresolved cord goat or goddess beast or benefactor. A quirky tidbit in one lesser-known version, Amalthea is said to have hung Zeus's cradle from a tree so that he was suspended between earth, sea, and sky, out of reach of his father Cronus, who ruled them all. Picture that a magical goat nanny also doubling as a clever strategist, stringing up a baby like laundry just to keep him safe. Meanwhile, back in the cave, none of this scholarly squabbling matters. Zeus is busy throwing figs at the Curetes who pretend not to notice, and Amalthea continues chewing stoically as if her identity crisis doesn't concern her in the slightest. To Zeus, she is Mother Mountain and Meal all rolled into one. To the nymphs, she is guardian and symbol. To the villagers who leave milk at her shrine, she is sacred. And to the scholars centuries later, she is a puzzle endlessly debated. You lean back against the cool stone wall amused. The cave smells faintly of moss and goat, the cornucopia still brims, as though nothing has changed, and the boy god drifts towards sleep on Amalthea's flank. Perhaps the answer doesn't matter. Perhaps her power lies in the fact that she can be goat and goddess symbol and story all at once. The debates will go on forever, but here in the cave the truth is simple. A child is safe and a goat keeps chewing. Night settles more often now beyond the cave mouth, and when you step outside, the stars seem sharper, brighter, as though they, too, are watching the boy grow. Zeus is taller, louder, his laughter carrying over the clamor of the Curetes' shields. Yet your eyes drift upward more than inward, for whispers have begun of Amalthea's reward. Not just shrines or stories, but immortality written in the sky. You look and find it easily a curve of faint stars forming the outline of a goat, her body bent, her horn extended. The Greeks would later call this constellation Capricorn, though even then it was said to carry Amalthea's essence. What better honor for the goat who fed a god than to be lifted where she could watch over mortals for all time? Historians still argue whether Capricorn's origins truly trace back to Amalthea, or if the constellation was retrofitted into her tale centuries later. But standing under the clear mountain air, you don't much care. The story feels right. A guardian raised high, her chewing jaw replaced by shimmering points of light. A quirky tidbit fits here: some ancient star maps depicted Amalthea not as a whole goat, but as a goatfish hybrid, front half goat, back half fish, an odd celestial mashup. You can't help but imagine her flopping awkwardly through the waves, while still chewing seaweed, unbothered by the physics of it all. Inside the cave, Amalthea herself seems unaware of her celestial promotion. She chews calmly on a branch, her one broken horn glinting faintly in torchlight. Zeus, sticky as ever, pats her side before toddling off to pester the nymphs. To him she is still mother, still warm, still real, not yet a pattern of stars. And yet you sense the shift. The cave holds not only a goat and a godling, but a myth poised to stretch upward, immortalized in constellations farmers will use to track their planting, sailors to guide their voyages, poets to season their verses. Amalthea's chewing will echo through time carried on starlight. You lie back on the rocky ground, gaze fixed on the constellation, and listen to the night. The mountain breathes, the cave hums with muffled clashing and goat sounds, and above it all, Amalthea gleams silent and eternal. The goat who once nursed Zeus is now forever in the sky, a guardian who will never truly vanish. Section 15. The stars keep their watch steady and patient while the cave grows quieter with each passing night. Zeus, once a wobbly toddler, now stretches his limbs with the confidence of someone destined for something larger than these stone walls. His mischief has not vanished. He still pelts figs at the Curetes when they aren't looking, but it has sharpened into focus like a bowstring drawn taut. He is almost ready to leave, though he doesn't know it yet. Amalthea, meanwhile, shows her years. She moves more slowly, her chewing softer, her breaths deeper. There is a dignity about her, though a sense that she understands her role has been fulfilled. In myths, her death comes quietly, her spirit carried into constellations, her horn into legend. Here you feel it not as tragedy, but as transition, the natural slipping of one story into the next. The nymphs stroke her coat tenderly, whispering thanks, while Zeus leans against her side, still finding comfort in her warmth. Even gods need mothers after all, and Amalthea has given him everything she had: milk, patience, a horn of plenty, and perhaps most importantly, the gift of survival. Historians still argue whether Amalthea's end was meant to be literal death, symbolic transformation, or both. Was she honored with shrines because she was a real creature remembered through myth, or did storytellers invent her passing as a way to explain the cornucopia and the stars? No one knows for certain, but the debate lingers like an echo in the mountains. A quirky tidbit: in some Roman retellings, Amalthea's skin was said to be fashioned into Zeus's protective shield, the aegis. Imagine that one day a gentle goat nursing a baby, the next a mighty war shield scaring off armies. From cud to combat, her legacy stretched in directions she probably never intended, and yet in this quiet moment you don't see a shield, a star, or a shrine. You see a goat resting, a boy murmuring in drowsy half-speech, and a cave heavy with the scent of moss, honey, and smoke. The Curetes keep up their clanging, but even their rhythm feels subdued, like a lullaby played on bronze. When Zeus finally leaves this cave, he will carry thunder, lightning, and a destiny vast enough to swallow empires. But he will also carry something humbler: the memory of a goat who raised him steady and uncomplaining in the shadow of fear and prophecy. Amalthea fades, but not really. Her presence lingers in the fruit that keeps spilling from the cornucopia, in the stars above, and in the soft chewing that seems to echo long after she is gone. You let yourself rest with that image. Zeus dozes against her side. The cave walls glow faintly with torchlight, and outside the mountain winds whisper like a chorus. Amalthea's story has come full circle, from branch-chewing guardian to eternal star, and you've walked alongside her every step. And now, as the story softens, so does the mountain. The clanging of shields recedes into the distance, more suggestion than sound, like memory dissolving at the edge of sleep. The cave air grows warmer, gentler, wrapping around you in the way soft blankets do on quiet nights. Amalthea's chewing fades to a rhythm you no longer hear with your ears, but feel with your body: slow, steady, endlessly patient. Zeus breathes evenly, his small chest rising and falling, and for once he is still. The cave, too, seems to rest, its dripping water stretched into long pauses, as though even stone is ready to dream. Outside, stars shimmer faintly, not sharp points but gentle glows, blurring at the edges the longer you gaze. The constellation of the goat tilts overhead, its outline softer now, like chalk brushed across velvet. You drift between worlds: stone, cave, night, sky, dream. Amalthea is there in all of them, her presence more feeling than form, warmth at your side, abundance in your hands, a watchful star above. The sound of mountain winds slows, elongated into whispers that draw you deeper into calm. Each breath you take matches the rhythm of her steady chewing, the eternal heartbeat of myth and care. You are safe here in this cave, in this story, in this moment. Nothing presses in, nothing disturbs. Only a goat, a child, and the quiet weight of history settling into peace. Let your eyes grow heavy now as the torchlight dims and the mountain exhales. Amalthea keeps watch above her constellation, steady. The story rests, and so can you.